Hey guys, welcome back to another Battlefield 6 deep dive, and today we're gonna take a look at all of the gunplay changes that have been made with the last update, what they actually look like and how they affect your gameplay. But before we get into the first details, here's a short overview of all the things that were changed and that we also talk about in this video. So damage values and multipliers were adjusted, sniper sweet spot, recoil variation and weapon dispersion as well, and also the muzzle velocity and bullet drag. And we get right in with the first topic, the damage values and multipliers. Before this update, Battlefield 6 didn't really make any difference between hitting the chest of an enemy or their little finger. All automatic weapons and DMRs had a limb multiplier of 1x, so it didn't really matter where you actually hit your target. Except for the head, of course, here there has always been a higher multiplier. The only weapon category that already had a lower limb multiplier before were the sniper rifles. Now, with update 1.3.3, this reduced limb multiplier was extended to all other weapon categories as well, except for sidearms and shotguns. These two categories still have a 1x multiplier across the whole body and an increased headshot multiplier, simply because sidearms are supposed to be your last resort and shotguns already have a high spread, so a reduced limb multiplier would make consistent shots on these two categories even harder. But for all the automatic weapons, DMRs and snipers, the limb multipliers have been adjusted. So for the automatic weapons, which are assault rifles, carbines, SMGs and LMGs, this means that hitting the arms, legs or abdomen of your target now only deals 84% of the base damage of the weapon instead of the 100% that it did before. And I'm going to show you some examples in a second, but what was changed as well here is the headshot multiplier, which was adjusted from 1.34x to 1.4x. And this also applies to the multipliers for the two ammunition types, hollow point and synthetic tip. Hollow point now increases the headshot multiplier to 1.57x, which was 1.5x before, and synthetic tip now has a multiplier of 1.8 for headshots, which was 1.75x before the update. But these changes were only made to automatic weapons, and if you're playing RedSec, there's another interesting detail for you. If your target is wearing body armor, then multiplier on the chest of your opponent is also decreased from 1x to 0.84x. Once the armor is broken, it's back to 1x. In multiplayer, this doesn't have an effect, of course, since there is no body armor. Here, the multiplier on the chest is always at 1x. However, one thing that you should know here is that when limbs are penetrated, then the game always uses the highest multiplier. So if you hit an arm that is in front of the chest, which naturally happens when your opponent is holding a weapon in front of them, then you still get the 1x multiplier for hitting the chest. Now, getting into the examples, here's a spreadsheet of how the damage and multipliers have changed with the last update. Because what was not part of the patch notes is that the developers have also adjusted the base damage of the weapons and not only the multipliers. So before the update, automatic weapons were pretty much grouped into 3 damage categories: 33, 25 and 20 damage, and the PW7 with its 16 damage. Limb multipliers were the same and headshots were higher. Now, after the update, the 33 category was increased to 35 damage, the 25 damage was increased to 26, and the PW7 was increased to 17. Only the 20 damage group is still the same. And in addition to this, the limb multiplier was decreased and the headshot multipliers were increased. Now, I don't want to give you a headache with this video, at least not more than I already do. So here's what this looks like translated into bullets to kill, which I think is most important. And here we can see that there are actually not too many changes. As expected, when shooting only at the limbs, you will need one more bullet for a kill with each damage category, but shots to the chest and also to the head still remain at the same bullets. The PW7 is a bit different here though. Here the increase in base damage actually leads to one less bullet when shot to the chest and one less bullet with hollow point ammunition as well. However, two things to note about this. In an actual gunfight, you will very likely not only deal damage to one body part. So when you mix it, you might need one more bullet in one situation and the same amount as before in another. And these damage values are the maximum amount of damage that these weapons deal on close range. They all have a damage drop off on range, which will make the lower limb multiplier even more noticeable. For example, here on the TR7, you can see that on all ranges you need one more bullet for a kill if you're not precisely aiming for the chest or head, not even counting in missed shots that get even more likely on longer ranges. When moving on to the DMRs, here the limb and abdomen multiplier was reduced from 1x to 0.91, but the headshot multipliers are still the same, at 1.34 for the GRT and LMR27 and 1.5 for all other DMRs. And the chest multiplier is also still at 1x. Except if you're playing RedSec and the body armor comes into play, then the chest multiplier drops down to 0.91x as well. However, similar to the automatic weapons, the DMRs also had their damage slightly adjusted. For the SVK, there were no changes made, but the EMR and SVD were increased to 41 from 40, and the LMR and GRT now deal a base damage of 29, which was 28 before. Translated into bullets to kill, this also doesn't show too much of a difference. However, like I said before, this doesn't show the full picture, of course, especially since this doesn't count in the damage drop-off. So I made an example with the SVK here, and here you can see the possible effect a bit better, because above 20 meters, the weapon now needs 3 shots for a kill instead of 2, at least when you're only hitting the limbs or when you hit a mix of limbs and chest. The rest, however, stays the same. And lastly, there are the sniper rifles, and here the limb and abdomen multiplier was reduced from 0.8 to 0.67, but headshot and chest multipliers stay the same. For the chest though, again, when playing RedSec, this will be reduced to 0.67 as well. And here there's also one weapon that had its damage adjusted, and that's the Mini Scout. This one was reduced from 80 to 62, and when combined with a new limb multiplier, this leads to one more bullet for kill when only the limbs are hit. So that's 3 bullets for the sniper rifle. However, when you shoot more precisely and manage to hit the chest or the head, you can still eliminate your targets with 1 or 2 shots. And when talking about one-shot sniper, we also need to talk about the adjusted sniper sweet spot. If you've never heard of this, sniper sweet spot is the range within which one bullet from a sniper rifle to the chest will eliminate the target. So within this range, the sniper rifle will actually deal the 100 damage that is shown in the description. And before the update, these ranges started on a longer distance and were also pretty wide. So for example, on the L115, it started at 120 meters and ended at 175. And with the update, these ranges were adjusted to be shorter and not as wide. So now the L115 has a sweet spot range between 100 and 133 meters. The only sniper rifle that is not affected by this is the Mini Scout, because this never had a sweet spot. So as a sniper, these ranges are your new best friend, and as a target, always look out for this rainbow glow around the scope glint. That's when you are within the sweet spot of a sniper. Moving on, we have the next big change that was added with this update, or well, at least it looked like a big change, and that's the adjustments to recoil variation. Recoil variation describes how much the recoil pattern of a weapon varies every time you fire your weapon. And we got this side-by-side comparison right here from the developers that shows the SOR 556 before the update and after the update, and the left side looks like there was a lot of recoil and a lot of recoil randomness and variation, and the right side looks like this is a much better pattern that is easier to control and easier to predict. But I'm going to show you the side-by-side comparisons that I have recorded of all of the weapons in the background, and here I shot 3 times at the same spot, always with the same weapon setup. And you might notice real quick that on some weapons, the pattern actually looks a lot better than before. It is reduced, it looks smaller, it looks more predictable. But then on other weapons, there's not much of a difference, and on some weapons, it even looks worse than before. Now, what has happened here? They didn't forget to change the recoil. The recoil variation has actually changed and makes recoil more predictable. However, alongside of these recoil changes, they have also adjusted weapon dispersion again. Now you might be wondering what's the difference between recoil variation and dispersion. Well, that's pretty easily explained. Recoil is how much and into which direction your weapon is moving when you're shooting, and recoil variation simply adds some variety to this natural weapon movement. Dispersion, on the other hand, defines how much and how randomly your bullets deviate from where you are aiming at. With a high dispersion, your bullets will deviate much further from your target compared to a low dispersion. And this actually has even more of an effect the longer you keep firing your weapon in automatic fire, because then over time the dispersion will grow bigger until it reaches the maximum it can have, which is why a lot of players use tap fire or burst fire when they're shooting, especially at long ranges, to keep the dispersion as low as possible. And with the latest update, this dispersion growth after the first shot was increased by 14%. On average. We don't have the exact numbers, we only have this average number. For weapons with high damage output like the AK-4D or M24 for example, it can even be up to 22%. Then again, there are also weapons with lower damage that can get a dispersion reduction of up to 48%, but this is pretty rare. And that's why we see these results here in the shooting patterns. And that's also why for some weapons it seems like it actually looks worse, because due to the increased dispersion, bullets now deviate further from the target than they did before, effectively making some weapons less accurate in sustained fire, even though they are easier to control. So the predictability of the recoil variation or of the recoil in general might be better, but you will not automatically hit your targets more accurately because the dispersion is now higher and your bullets will spread a lot more around the point you're aiming at. And lastly, we have the muzzle velocity and drag that were also adjusted. Muzzle velocity is the speed at which the bullet leaves your weapon, and drag defines how much your bullet drops on range. And this has been changed for almost all weapons, including DMRs and sniper rifles, and the muzzle velocity was decreased for all of them between values of -4 and -9%, which makes it harder to hit moving targets on longer ranges since your bullet has a longer traveling time. And the only weapon that had its muzzle velocity increased is the KV-9. This one got a plus of 4%. And when it comes to bullet drag, this was also increased by 40% across all weapons, and even by 100% when you're using the match grade ammo type that is available on snipers and DMRs. And as a result of this change, you now need to aim higher to compensate the bullet drag when you're shooting at targets on longer ranges. On short range, both the velocity and drag don't have as much of an impact. And that was it for today. I hope you found this video helpful and it makes it a little bit easier to understand all of the changes that were made to the gunplay in the last update and how this affect your gameplay. And if it does, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. I'm the Catwoman and you are awesome.